so today we will kind of touch base in the Chinese educational system. As you can see, there are two signs on the walls here. One states, education changes fate and wisdom leads you to glory. And these are kind of some statements that are instilled in Chinese classrooms still today, because it's all about embodying their education and their futures.
Okay, so I'm going to start us off here with education in early China, and by early I mean very early, as in 2000 BC, which is where we trace what they have today. We still trace their educational system back to this. That should be Keiju with a U, but it's based on the Keiju, which is a system, which is a civil examination system, wherein you test to get positions in the government, and it was pretty much the only way to get a position in the government. And it's based on the idea of Confucian meritocracy, which is basically you get positions in the government based on your merit, which is the root of that word up there. And so basically you have to have an education in order to take these tests, in order to get a position in the government, because it's all based on what you can do and how well you can do it. And because it's all based on this level of education, it creates, starting way back in 2000 BC, it creates a huge socioeconomic divide, because testing was only available to the wealthy and minority, because you had to pay to take the test, and it costs a lot of money to get tutors and to attend the schools wherein you would learn what was going to be on the test. So anybody who wasn't part of the very small portion of wealthy people in China, starting from the very beginning, is stuck. You can't move up in life without taking this test. And it also creates really widespread illiteracy, which continued into the modern age, into a lot of the modern age, which Alyssa will get into later. You may have learned actually quite a bit about this just through observation if you were reading Snowflower and the Secret Fan closely, because her oldest son starts with taking lessons with a tutor who is his grandfather, because they want him to get a position in the government. And you see how important that is based on how much the grandfather forces him to be there for like 8 hours a day, sitting there listening, paying attention, memorizing tons of facts so that he can get a good position in government. And then Snowflower tries to do the same, or not Snowflower, but Lily tries to do the same thing for Snowflower's son to make sure that he can also move up in life and move out of his station as a butcher. And he can only do that if he has a tutor, and since his parents can't afford a tutor, Lily pays for the tutor for him. Alright, so what was on this test? It was all based on classical, what we now call classical Chinese. And this classical education was based on non-technical moral and political theory, which most of it is Confucian ideals and Confucian writings. You're memorizing things about politics. Like she said, the education changes fate, and the wisdom
leads you to glory.
Wisdom leads you to glory. It's memorizing like snippets and ideas like that, not fact like we think of today. We think of like, oh, you have to be able to do calculus, or you have to be able to study or find and name the parts of the cell. It's not that kind of technical know-how. It's very much an I am a Confucian. You're showing that you embody these traits that everybody's looking for at the time. And then on top of that, students would also learn several written and spoken languages. There was no alphabet. There still isn't technically an alphabet, but it was even more widespread earlier in Chinese history because the country is so large and there's so many different dialects. There was no like clear system of this is how we write. So you would learn a lot of written and spoken languages, which made it even more difficult for somebody who couldn't afford a tutor to learn it, because there was no way for them to learn it, because there wasn't a clear system of writing or speaking. It just depended on where you were. So if you wanted to learn something outside of where you were, you had to get someone who lived and knew that language or that style of language. The most prevalent one today is Mandarin. And that's the most prevalent dialect in Chinese. There is no real Chinese language per se. There are a lot of different dialects that Chinese people speak. Mandarin is the most prevalent. And even now, with the internet and with how closely tied everything is, and with even in the communist country where it's all about we are one, they have over 40,000 symbols which we have 26 letters in our alphabet, and it makes up every single word. They have to memorize over 40,000. I mean, nobody ever, I think, memorizes every single character or symbol, but you have to be able to pick up, based on context clues, what all these symbols that you don't know mean, which is a lot to do and to learn throughout your lifetime. And it was even worse back then because they had no way to channel it together because it was so spread out. And the schools were created pretty much only for test preparation. You started off very early. There were only tutors. You would pay for a tutor to come in, somebody who already knew all the information, and to train you one-on-one. And then I think it was around 1000 AD, they start to get a system, a federally funded system of schooling, which is way centuries before the rest of the Western world even had the idea that you would fund schooling through the government. There were 2 levels of school at this time, and that's Jiangju, which are local schools. You would go there, and then you would have probably local tutors, people who either were part of the aristocracy, who then come or retire and come out and teach, or who fell from grace and come out and teach. And then if you did well there, you could either take the test and probably get a lower position in government, or you could try and move on to Gyeoju, which should be another U there. I think I spelled this in cursive for them when I was writing it out, which is why she thinks there's a W where there should be a U. Totally understandable, and I should have been much clearer on that. So Gyeoju are government schools, and they're much higher quality. You're going to have people who are currently in government teaching you. You're going to have a better chance of getting a position and hopefully more thorough education so you can get a higher position in the government. The Ming Dynasty rejected a lot of the system, but the Jing Dynasty reinstated it, which is in about 1400 AD. They rule from 1600 to through the 1900s is the Qing Dynasty, and they reinstate this system, this civil examination system, which the Ming Dynasty had rejected because they were out trying to make it a fairer process. And then once they're overthrown, that all goes out the window, and you're back to this huge separation between the haves and the have-nots. And that system sticks around until the late 1900s, which is where Alyssa comes in.
Okay, so I will basically be covering from the early 20th century to modern day. So around the 20th century, the New Republic of China began to fail within the education because they had attempted to instate its own educational program, but it was ultimate failure because of the Civil War at this time and the Japanese invasion during World War II. Also, end of Chinese imperial dynasty, which consisted of the Confucian system and the imperial examination system. And as Sarah kind of covered briefly, both of these systems, but the Confucian system was the teaching that education is the path to self-improvement and that anyone can rise up through study and perseverance. The Confucian education emphasizes basic skills like reading, writing, and arithmetic, as well as music, art, poetry skills such as horseback riding and martial arts, actually. And the imperial examination system, which Sarah also mentioned, was applied in this society during this time because it was selected by officials from intellectuals, and both of these systems were abolished. Also, Western-style education became more popular, and reformers believed that the Western-style education could allow China to become a powerful nation. Around 1949, compulsory primary and secondary education was instated under the Ministry of Education. 20% of China's population was literate at this time, which is very low, and they're lacking educational facilities as well as minimal national curricular goals. During the 1950s, the new Chinese leadership and social vision was instilled. And during this time, the national agenda to expand the rate of literacy and provide education for the majority of Chinese youth became more popular as well. During the 1960s, they considered they were considered to be a cultural revolution, and Mao Zedong, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Thank you. He turned to students and youth activists to revitalize revolutionary values and to start a new generation of Chinese young people dedicated to communist ideals. 1/3 of primary school students received access to middle school education, and less than 0.1% have the opportunity to study at the university level. By the end of 2000, 1,000 regular institutions of higher learning existed, and that consisted of 5.6 million students. Around 2001, Chinese literacy rate was approximately 70%, although literacy levels between sexes were also unequal. Urban schools at this time were funded by the state, and rural schools were dependent on local funds and support. The priorities of the government at this time was to stress students, their education, and this was more popular with the government, teachers, and parents. And all youth were able to have access to education, although middle school and university students, that was a little less accessible. Also, students starting in middle school, they were in school for probably around 6 days a week, which is not very similar to our education style. And also students spend a lot of their free time studying, and this was expected of them to have high grades in all subjects. Also, financial future of the family was very dependent on their students' performances. And although the student population is very high, only 30% of students had good grades and were able to attend good high schools. And also, I would like to point out as well, the suicide rate in China is very high, which we mentioned previously also in our studies. But comparing Chinese suicides to the United States, it's around 182,000 people in China commit suicide a year. And in the US, it's around 36,000 deaths. And if you do the math, that's 15,000 per month in China, which is a lot. And getting into good high schools in China means that you'll have an opportunity to attend a university. And if you do not qualify, you've lost your future chance of attending a university. In China, modern day today, their goal is to eliminate illiteracy, which is what they've struggled for so long to accomplish, and to also instill values and skills for the Chinese citizens. Also, just basically wrapping up, students either attend a university or they do factory work. I know it's really blunt, but basically, if you don't do well in your education, you will end up working in retail or agriculture or things like that. And now Becky will cover education comparing the United States and China.
Alright, so it's kind of interesting to see how the two educational systems do differ. So just kind of a little compare and contrast with American and Chinese. So American, we aim to teach students how to think independently, which is, critical thinking skills. Whereas Chinese aims to teach students how to imitate, so therefore they're more doing like rote learning. There was a really good comparison how they compared it to a parrot, where a parrot can speak English to you, but they don't understand what they're saying, and that's kind of how they compared the Chinese students in a way. I know it's kind of blunt, but whatever. That's what they do. They're imitating, they're learning so much information that all they can do is memorize, where they're not really thinking deeply about it as much. Where again, we are thinking more on what are the different ways where studies with kind of finding different answers to questions, the big question, how there's many answers for them, but in Chinese they kind of want to teach them one way. In America, teachers are not always respected. For those of you that are ed majors, we've talked about that. I think you talked about that as a freshman, how people don't always look bright on the career of a teacher. Some people don't even consider it really a profession, just with the way salary is and just the misconceptions that people want to be teachers because they get summers off and all that stuff. So therefore they are not having a respectful title. where in China teachers do have really high respect over there.